Picture something for me. You just got out of a super long respawn, maybe 10 seconds. And you walk out of spawn, the gate opens, and nothing. Not having a teleporter is a pretty bad feeling. Especially if you have a mechanic who just hasn't built one, or an inactive teleporter entrance. It just sucks, right? I digress. My point is, not having a mechanic really sucks. For a lot of reasons, mechanic is extremely important. No matter what game mode it is, it's always much nicer to have a mechanic who is at least building something, assuming that the buildings are in a somewhat helpful spot, since new players on mechanic aren't always the most useful player to have, but they usually learn pretty quick. The dispenser and teleporter are probably the most helpful buildings that mechanic has, since literally every class can benefit from them greatly. Maybe less for classes like Marksman and Agent, who probably see the least use out of both of these buildings, just based off how they are both much farther from the main action than everyone else. But for every other class, they can all benefit amazingly from an infinite HP and ammo outlet. Obviously, teleporters are buildings that are helpful literally always, except some smaller maps they aren't as powerful. Still better to have one than not, right? But these buildings are often game changers, especially if your mechanic is good enough at keeping his buildings safe and upgraded. I know I'm leaving sentries out of this right now, but sentries are more of a thing supposed to prevent pushes, or help keep the mechanic's other buildings safe and things of that manner. But we'll talk more about sentry guns a little later. Things like payload mechanic is almost always needed for a defending team, because of how far the defending team's spawn can end up being from the checkpoint. Now for game modes like 3CP, he isn't as important, but not useless of course. With the fact that most of the time the team controlling the middle of the map switches so often, it makes it a little hard to keep up with how close your building should really be. Of course, this was a lot more prominent on 5CP, but that was removed, so it doesn't matter here. Mechanic isn't always 100% needed for a team, but again, it's far more preferable to have him than not. I don't doubt that you already know most of this, so with how helpful and game-changing Mechanic can be, why, more often than not, is Mechanic an unfilled class? To me, it's similar to the problem that Doctor has, such an important and helpful class that is rarely played. But most people stray from Doctor because he's a healer. A majority of people would rather be the one shooting rather than being the backbone of it. Even then, Mechanic is still mostly focused on being a shooty gun guy. Hell, you aren't even the one shooting anymore. And that is also part of the problem sometimes. I'm not going to make any big point about it, but not really being the one shooting at players of course can bore you a little. But what about the Wrangler, I hear you ask? And to that I say shut up. That doesn't count. Mechanic is often not that fun to play, for reasons like being forced to set up a nest, which makes sense. Game modes like Payload and CTF basically require you to sit in a meta spot with your buildings and never move away from them. Which, it's fine that Mechanic sits still and isn't doing most of the shooting, that's just how Mechanic is. But you can't be surprised when classes that require a lot more attention from the actual player see more excitement than just hitting metal boxes. Because often, other classes are much more engaging than Mechanic. I'm not saying other classes are more fun than Mechanic because that's subjective, I'm saying they are more engaging. Anyway, we should move on. Mechanic is a support class. Well, not literally. He's listed as defensive, but you can't tell me that the main focus of Mechanic isn't to support your team, because you're wrong and you can't change my mind on that. Anyway, I've expressed the idea briefly before that teammates in TC2 aren't really teammates, more like people you're just kind of forced to play with for the next 5 minutes or so. Oh. But I bring this up because Mechanic really, and I mean really, needs his team around him for him to be able to keep him and his buildings alive. Again, with the example of Doctor. Doctor is basically nothing without his team, and often likewise for Mechanic. Having a team that cares about you more than even a thanks voice line is extremely rare. I mean, what more should I really expect from TC2 lobbies? Most players aren't very smart.
What the f*** is my
Anywho, it's frustrating to play a support class when your team can't support you. That's what I'm getting at here. I'm not the first to say it, and likely not the last, but try to be helpful to your mechanics if they are helpful to you, even if that's just sticking near them. That's not all of why I think Mechanic is so unenjoyable, but I feel like the rest of what I'm about to talk about fits a lot better into its own chapter. If you can't already tell, my main point of this video is Mechanic is underpowered, and this chapter is mostly about that. I think the best place we can really start is with the two, glaring problems. Firstly, I play a ton of Trooper and Annihilator, which I hope says something about my opinion of Mechanic being underpowered. I'd like to talk about Trooper's relation to Mechanic before Annihilator, mainly since he's my most played, and because he's probably the least oppressive out of the two. Evil Mechanic! Now this goes for either of these two classes, but explosives are, well, good at destroying things. I probably didn't need to say that. But seeing a class like Trooper as Mechanic is just the feeling of, I really hope my team actually does something about him. And most of the time, your team doesn't really care. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. Trooper himself is almost as good at destroying nests as Annihilator is, and I'll explain why that is a little later on, but Trooper only has 2 rocket launchers that can't effectively take down nests. One of them does 0 damage, and this one can still be fairly destructive if it's used in conjunction with the Trooper's team, or just plain annoying, I guess. Since we're on the topic of rocket launchers, we should really talk about this train wreck. Train wreck for Mechanic, I mean. It's a blast for Trooper. No pun intended. The direct hit isn't exactly designed for destroying buildings, or at least I'm pretty sure it isn't, but these 2 stats really make destroying buildings as easy as it is to destroy players with this thing. And it's not like Trooper needs a better rocket launcher for destroying buildings. Again, almost anything in his arsenal, especially stock, easily blows up buildings. More specifically, sentry guns. While sentry guns are probably the best defensive tool you can have, things like the direct hit make them more of an afterthought. But entirely more dangerous than the direct hit is, well, Annihilator. If you've been paying attention, I said that Trooper is almost as good at destroying nests as Annihilator is. Now, why is that? It's very simple. You see, the downfall of pipes and rockets is that they can be air blasted away, entirely countering them. But due to what I only assume is a bug with TC2, sticky bombs midair can't be air blasted. Midair specifically, by the way. Once they stick to the ground, they can be air blasted, so just detonate them before they hit the ground. As well, stickies remove room for healing buildings, since it applies all of that damage instantly. Not that this is a big problem, though, since you'd kill the Mechanic with splash damage most of the time anyway. And all of Annihilator's grenade launchers can destroy nests. Hell, they made the Ultimatum still do 100 damage to buildings. Why? Hell if I know. Now, surely, with the fact that Annihilator's base kit is the bane of Mechanic's existence, we wouldn't have a weapon that is designed to destroy buildings even better than he already can. Right? The Iron Force is the same situation as the direct hit, except this time the Iron Force is designed to destroy buildings, and it's pretty good at it. My original thought about the Iron Force was similar in mind to the direct hit, in that it overpowers Mechanic far too much. But no splash damage on pipes is pretty bad. How's that different from the direct hit? That is no splash either. Well, what covers the direct hit is its super fast projectile, while the Iron Force just shoots normal pipes that do a little more damage to buildings. Don't get me wrong, it's not that the no splash damage makes the Iron Force useless, it just kinda ruins destroying crowds. It's really an either or between stock or Iron Force. For nests that have buildings closer together, you'd want to bring stock, but for buildings that are more spread out from each other, you'd want the Iron Force. Overall, being on the other end of the Iron Force or another grenade launcher kind of doesn't matter. It's more of a pick your poison kind of situation, since you'll likely meet the same fate. Now, with all this explosive talk, I know what a few of you are thinking. Personally, I can't recall the last time I've been bested by someone using the short circuit. Sure, it can keep projectiles back for maybe a little bit, but this thing uses a ton of metal really fast. And it's not like any Trooper or Annihilator is just gonna run out of ammo. Maybe it could buy you some time for your team to come help you out, but most of the time that won't happen. I'm not trying to play off the short circuit as bad to make Mechanics seem more countered. I genuinely think the short circuit is a garbage solution to the problem at hand. I suppose if you're playing something like Battle Mechanic or whatever you want to call it, then yes, there's some use out of it since you're saving yourself rather than your buildings. But at that point, are you really helping your team when you're deep in enemy lines building nothing but level 1 buildings? You tell me. Well, what about Air Blast? Well, sure. If you have an arsonist who's a caring enough person to sit around your nest and just air blast all day, yeah, of course that works. Or, kinda. That only solves 2 out of 3 of our problems, since the whole sticky bomb thing. But if you have Flog's air blast, then you can destroy any projectiles, including stickies. So if I have a Flog arsonist always at my nest that can air blast anything perfectly, then I guess I'm okay. Yeah, you can see how that doesn't work out. These are random TC2 lobbies. Nobody really cares about you. Again, we've been over the whole teammate thing, but I think it's safe to say you should expect the worst out of your brothers and sisters in arms. Speaking of sisters, wow, what a weird transition. Agents! If it weren't already enough, just throw in some more things to keep pushing mechanic down. I'm mostly joking. For a class having a weapon obviously designed to counter you, it isn't that bad to deal with. Sure, dying to an agent likely means game over for any of your nearby buildings, but how is that different from dying from something like a trooper? Your buildings go down after that too. I'd argue agent is easier to deal with than explosives. And maybe you agree. To be honest, I don't really have that much to say about agents. It's not like any of the zapper side grades or something crazy like the direct hit. I mean, this one is literally a camera. Sticking around your nest and basically just doing watch duty is the best way to prevent an agent from getting you, but you're probably sitting around your nest doing that anyway. While agent is still a danger, comparatively, agent is definitely the challenge I'd rather be up against rather than, well, you know. So hey, at least there's not a third class that we can't deal with effectively. Anyway, I think it's finally time that I give you my final closing thoughts here. You might ask, well, how do we improve mechanic? I'll tell you first. Making mechanic stronger is 1, not the problem, and 2, a bad idea. So the only other real option is to change what he's going up against. But perhaps that's a discussion that someone or other will have, since that's its own rabbit hole. Mechanic is extremely important to almost every team, but then is constantly pushed back by his counters, to a bit of a crazy extent, I'd say. But maybe I'm wrong. I mean, this video is one big opinion if you haven't somehow noticed. Maybe I'm just bad at mechanic. Maybe so. Perhaps he just isn't for me. Thanks for watching.